Okay, this is the first video in our series of Pythagorean Theorem notes. The first thing I want you to know is some important vocabulary for the legs, and this word is called the hypotenuse, and then I'll give you the formula itself. So off to the side, you should see this picture, and I want you to notice that the very specific type of triangle this is a right triangle. So if it has a right angle, which adds up to 90 degrees, that's what that little box represents. That represents a 90-degree angle. This is the only type of triangle that the Pythagorean theorem will work in. It has to be a right triangle. So the right angle could be at the top, the right angle could be at the bottom. It doesn't matter, but it could be a right triangle that's long like this one. It doesn't really matter as long as there is a right triangle in it. That's the only time that you can apply the Pythagorean theorem. It will not work in any other triangle. So if you have like, a 60, 60, 60 triangle, these are 60 degrees, or like an 80, 80, and then what would that be? 20 or something like that triangle. These will not work. So again, the only type of triangle that the Pythagorean theorem will work in is a right triangle. So let me give you some vocab. The legs of the triangle, as you can see in this picture, these are the two legs. Those are the two shorter sides. The two shorter sides of a right triangle. Of a right triangle. Sorry, I know you can't see that, but that is the word triangle. I also want you to know that these specific legs are the two, that, by the way, that was a little semicolon. I know, I went really fast. So that means it also, I want you to know one other thing about the legs. It is the two sides that are, I'm going to use a fancy word here, adjacent, 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 I'll tell you what that means in a second, to the right angle. Okay, so when you get to geometry, you're going to hear this word adjacent a lot. So adjacent means touching, means right next to. So what you can see here is this is a leg, and look at what it does. It touches the 90-degree angle. This is the other leg. It also touches the 90-degree angle. So these two legs are adjacent, means they meet, they make up the right angle. They touch the right angle. So these two legs are adjacent to each other. They meet, they touch. So those are adjacent to the right angle, and they are the two of the shorter sides. So like in my three little weird pictures I drew up here, this would be a leg and this would be a leg because it makes up the right angle. This would be a leg and this would be a leg. This would be a leg and this would be a leg. Okay, let's move on to this weird word. It is pronounced hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is the third side. So specifically, here's your definition. It is the side of the right triangle, the side of the right triangle that is the longest. So it doesn't matter what the weird shape of the triangle is, if it's, got one really short side and then another shorter side, the longest side is always going to be the hypotenuse. So this is the hypotenuse, the ones that I'm making little wiggles on. So these are the hypotenuses. And then over in your picture, this is the hypotenuse. It is the longest side of the right triangle. It's always the longest. And then I've got a little semicolon to put here too, because it's not only the side of the right triangle that's the longest, but it is also the side opposite. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. It is the side opposite of the right angle. It's opposite of the right angle. So let's look at the right angle right here in your picture. If you go from the right angle, just opposite it, if you follow this little arrow, this little dashed arrow, that's going to be the hypotenuse. It's opposite your right angle. It does not touch. It's not adjacent to the right angle like the legs are. It's opposite the right angle. So you've got two legs and a hypotenuse in every right triangle. So the Pythagorean theorem itself is just a formula. So the formula is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And it's as easy as that. That's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So now I need you to look at this triangle again that's off to the side. The two legs represent your a and b. And it does not matter if you want to make this side a and this side b, or if you want to make this side b and this side a. It does not matter, but legs have to be your a and b. And the reason is because we're adding those. So it doesn't matter if this was 2 and this was 3, because 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus 2. As long as you know that the a and b are the legs. The c has to be the hypotenuse. The two shorter legs have to add up to the longest leg, which is the hypotenuse. So the c has to always, always, always be the longest side, the hypotenuse. So again, leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So let me show you how to take this formula, and we are going to put it into action in our problems down here at the bottom. So here's a right triangle. What I want you to notice is it's a leg and a leg, and one of our legs is 5 and one is 7. So if we use a squared plus b squared to equal our c squared, we're trying to find the missing hypotenuse length. So we're trying to find the missing, instead of a question mark, I should have called it a c. We're trying to find the c, the hypotenuse. So a could be 5 or it could be 7, b could be 5 or it could be 7. So it doesn't matter which is which. I'm going to put 5 in for a and 7 in for b. But if you picked 7 here and 5 here, it's going to be the same answer. We don't know what c is, so we're going to leave it c squared. If you don't know what it is, just leave it the variable. All right, order of operations say do not add first. If you right now added 5 plus 7 and got 12, you already did it wrong. You have to do order of operations, which is square this first, square this second, and then go back and add it up. So 5 squared means 5 times 5. If you have a calculator that has a little squared button on it like I do right here, I can just do 5 squared, and that looks like this. If you don't have a fancy squared button, you can also just do 5 times 5. Squared means times itself. That would be 25. Okay, and then we're going to do 7 squared, which just means 7 times 7, which is 49. And that is what equals c squared. So we have to add these together now. 25 plus 49. 25 plus 49 is 74. Okay, a lot of kids stop right here and they're like, okay, 74. So the long side of the hypotenuse is 74. Let me ask you if that makes sense. Would it make sense for 3 sides of a triangle to be 5, 7, and then 74? I hope you said no. There's no way that you could have sides of a triangle be tiny, a little bit bigger, and huge. 74, that's not right. So what we've done here is we've come up with what 74 equals, but it equals what c is squared. And we're trying to find what only c is, not c squared. We just want c without being squared. So you have to unsquare it to find out what 74 is. And the word unsquared is square root. So the opposite of squared is square root. So in order to unsquare something, you square root it. And if we do that to one side, we also have to do it to the other side. So it is not divided by 2. A lot of kids are like, oh, divided by 2. So that'd be like 37 or whatever it is. I don't even know. But no, that would still be too big. 5, 7, and 37 is not a very reasonable answer. So we're going to take our calculator, and I have a square root button right here. It's above my x squared button. It's in the background. So I have to push second or shift to get it to go to that one. So I'm going to do second and then my square root button. And it should look like this. And so then I'm going to put in 74. equals. And it's about 8.6. I know it's irrational, and so we're not going to put all that. We're going to round it to 8.6. So c squared, c unsquared is about, and this little squiggly equals means I rounded it. It's not exactly 8.6, but it's about 8.6. So let's see if that makes sense. If one side is 5 and one side is 7, would my longest side be about 8.6? Yes. So now that we know this is a reasonable answer, we're going to go ahead and circle it. That is what C equals. So I think once you get the hang of these are going to go really quickly, especially if you have a calculator. But that's all we're doing today for this first part. We have the two legs. We're trying to find the missing hypotenuse. So let's try it in number 2. You don't always have to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared either. Once you get the hang of knowing the formula, you can just fill it in. So a and b are interchangeable. You can use it for a or b, it doesn't matter. I'll just go 10 for a, 13 for b. We don't know c, so it's going to stay c. 10 squared is 10 times 10, which you can use your calculator, or maybe you already know that's 100. 13 squared, 13 times 13 is 169. And then that equals c squared. We don't know what c is. We're just going to leave it. If you add these two together, 100 plus 169, you get 269. You can use your calculator and double check. And remember, that is not c. You can't have 13, 10, and then almost 300. That's not very reasonable. So you know you're not done yet. You need to square root c and square root 269 on both sides. So I'm going to do shift, my square root button, 269, and it comes out to be about 16.4. So we're going to say that c is about 16.4, and that is much more reasonable based on these numbers. So c is 16.4. And remember, it's always going to be your longest side. C is going to be the longest side. So 16.4 is reasonable. Okay, number 3. Since I'm running out of room, I'm not going to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared this time. I just know that I'm going to use 17 and 16 for a and b. Sorry, not 17, 7 and 16 for a and b. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip to that step. 7 squared plus 16 squared equals c squared. All right, 7 squared, I did that earlier, it was 49. 16 squared, I have no idea. 256. And we're just going to leave it equal to c squared. I'm going to add 49 plus 256, and I got 305. 305 is not the answer. That is not a reasonable answer, but I know that it's because c is being squared. So I need to square root it to find out what c is by itself. So c is going to be about whatever the square root of 305 is. Square root 305, about 17 point, the 6 is going to bump my 4 up to a 5. So 17.5. So about 17.5. Yes, that is a reasonable answer to have 16, 7, and 17.5 for my hypotenuse. So I did it right. Okay, number 4. 13 and 14 are the legs. So I'm going to put 13 for one of the legs squared plus 14 for the other leg squared equals, I don't know the hypotenuse, so we're just going to leave it c squared. 13 squared, I did that above, was 169. 14 squared is 196. So when I add those two together, 169 plus 196, it equals 365. And again, that is not the hypotenuse. That is what the hypotenuse squared is. So I need to unsquare it, which is called square root. The square root of 365 is 19.1. About 19.1. All right, a couple more of these. I think you're probably going to have the hang of it. On 5, we have two legs that are 5 and 8. So I'm just going to make 5 my A and 8 my B. Again, it doesn't matter if you put 8 first and then 5, that's fine. We're trying to find the missing hypotenuse. 5 squared is 5 times 5, which is 25. 8 squared is 64, I believe. So then we're going to add those two together. 25 plus 64. 89 is what that equals. And that is not my answer. That is the answer before I square root it. So once I square root 89, I get about 9.4. The 3 does not bump it up, so it's just 9.4. So about 9.4, and that's the answer there. Number 6, we have legs of 20 and 10. So if I make 20 my A and 10 my B, remember I still don't know the C squared. 20 squared, I believe, is 400. 20 times 20, I think, is 400. Yes. 10 times 10, I know, is 100. I know that 400 plus 100 is 500. And 500 is definitely not a reasonable answer for this missing side length, the missing hypotenuse. So I'm going to square root it to get a reasonable answer. So the square root of 500 is 22 the 3 is going to get bumped up to a 4 because this is 5 or above. So 3 becomes 4. So 22.4. So C is about 22.4, and that is a reasonable amount. Okay, if you are ready to try this on your own, I would like for you to pause the video and go to the 4 problems on the next page, which say try it on your own. And if you're not quite ready to try it on your own, you can let the video play and check your work. Okay, I'm going to work these out with you just so that you can fast forward and check that you make sure you got them all right. If the legs are 11 and 3, doesn't matter if you put 11 first or 3 first, you're going to get the same answer, but make sure you plug them in somehow for A and B or B and A. 11 squared is 121. 3 squared is 9. When I add 121 plus 9, I get 130. Then I take the square root of 130. And if I'm going too fast for you, please replay this or pause it. 11.4. So C is about 11.4. Okay, for number 8, you have side lengths of 7 and 19. So I'm just going to do 7 squared plus 19 squared equals C squared. Again, the order of A and B don't matter. 7 squared is 49. 19 squared is 361. And so when you add 49 plus 361, you get 410. And then remember, last step, you have to square root both sides to get C by itself. So 410 square rooted is 20.2. That 4 is not going to bump it up, so just 20.2. So we're going to leave it 20.2. All right, number 9, 7 and 10. So I'm going to do just 10 squared plus 7 squared equals C squared. I know that 10 squared is 100. I know that 7 squared is 49. I know that 100 plus 49 is 149. But I don't know what the square root of 149 is. So I'm going to use my calculator. Square root of 149 equals 12.2. 12.2. So C is about 12.2 on this one. All right, and then on the very last one, 13 and 8 are the 2 legs. So we're going to do 13 squared plus 8 squared equals C squared. 13 squared is 169. 8 squared is 64. I feel like I'm going really fast now, so I hope you guys are just using this video to check your answers and not to work along with me. 169 plus 64 equals 233. And when you take the square root of 233, I have no idea what you get. You get 15 that 2 is going to get bumped up to a 3 because it's above 5 or above. So 15.3. Okay.